IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. My name is Rohan Seth and I am here today with Prateek Wagre and Sapni G. Krishna. We're going to be talking about Australia's new anti-trolling law. I'll just put some context to this. Sapni and I have got a group on the app that we work on. It's called the Podmobile. In the Podmobile, we ask for podcast topics that might be interesting for us to record on. And imagine our delight when an anti-trolling bill, which has implications, anonymity implications for India, came about. So it's quite a meaty episode that we've got for you today. But before we delve into that, I want to talk to you about courses at Takshashila, dear listener. See, if you like the stuff that we talk about, I strongly recommend you check out our GCPP Tech and Policy course and other GCPP courses, including Health and Life Sciences, Defense and Foreign Affairs, and so on. Applications are now open. Yeah, having said that, let's go on and talk about the new bill itself. I imagine this bill is a response to a case, and we've been calling it the Waller case for a while. So, Sapni, let's go to you first and sort of give us some context of what this case is and how it led to this bill.
Right. So this particular case is Fairfax Media Publications and others versus Dylan Pollard, where particular gentleman got extremely offended that a piece of comment on a Facebook page appeared on a page which the administrator belonged to Fairfax Media Publications, which is a Australian publication media house, which has TV and news and print media publications. So essentially, this gentleman complained and went to the court saying that this publication of the comment on this particular post on this page was defamatory, and hence he wanted to be compensated for that. But while having this discussion, the respected court ended up deciding that the appellate court decided that publishers who posted links to the story on their respective websites are liable for defamatory comments posted under their Facebook pages. So essentially here Fairfax Media Publication was held liable for a post, for a comment under their post, which they had very minimal control over. So here, the very critical question of liability, right? When we've gone on and on about safe harbor protections on ATP on multiple episodes. So that question of liability was addressed here on the basis that pages posting links on Facebook and other social media platforms, they invite comments from the public. And this is a clear lack of understanding of how social media itself functions. And also, I also say probably the contractual relation itself that the court didn't get right. Because there is a very clear differentiation between an invitation to offer and an offer that contract law makes, which for some reason the court seems to have ignored, negated, and moved on. So here, at that point in time at least, there could be nothing that this page could do or the administrator could do if we did not have a default comment disable option. And of course, the structure of social media platforms itself is based on amplification of comments and shares. And very interestingly, what the court's answer to this was that there is a hide filter which would hide such comments made by other third parties on the pages, except for the admin, the commenter, and the friends of the commenter. So while this is a defamation suit, something very critical for defamation suits is unavoidable element to defamation in law is publication. And this, however, does not prevent publication, and hence this would continue to be defamation. So the court gives no basis for why it finds the application of or the mistake, quote unquote, mistake of this page for not enabling the hide filter or doing other things such as individually deleting comments, which the court identifies as there is already publication, so it will still come on as defamation. So that's quite strange. And here the court says how the publication page itself encourages other third parties to interact, and because of which they are to be categorized as publishers. And that goes back not just to this case, but previous poor jurisprudence in Australia coming from a couple of other cases. And very poorly, it also negates the defense that the law provides for innocent dissemination. Innocent dissemination meaning under Australian law that it is a mitigating defense for with regards to publication itself rather than the other aspects of defamation. That to prove that there was no intent there was no active participation in publication, but the court held that here it's a case of assisting the person who is commenting and that knowledge and intention is not necessary for defamation, and hence the page owner and the administrator would be liable as publisher. And that is the background mostly to this classic case of making one mistake to fix another, what I'd say, this particular case in this particular pin.
Thanks, Sapni. That's exceptionally well laid out. It's super interesting to me how this has led to sort of this chain of events, basically. But let's sort of move on from that and talk about what the bill contains. So, Pratik, do you want to take us through the fine print of this bill?
Yeah, so the story picks up essentially, right after the Waller case, right? I think that happened sometime in September, and whatever we say about the bill, I think one due credit to the process, the fact that the Australian government publishes such detailed explanatory notes along with the bill, right? I think that's really helpful, right, in terms of understanding where they're coming from. And so they say pretty much upfront that this is the idea of this bill is to essentially, since the Waller judgment was putting liability on an average or just any social media user who ran a page, it was to move that liability off them. Right? Now, but what the bill also does is that it then involves the social media platform itself or social media service that they define as potentially a party in these defamation cases. And again, the fact that defamation plays a huge role in it is evident throughout, because even the responses that you have to send to it, right? The ID is defamation that something, right? It's a defamation task force that's working on it. So that's pretty clear throughout through everything about the bill itself, right? And the idea, the where it seems to take off from is that a lot of defamatory posts are made by anonymous accounts, right? And if you need to, if someone needs to, to initiate court proceeding against them, they need to find out who that person is, right? It's a time consuming process. You may or may not get that information because this is not, people are anonymous, right? So what the bill essentially does is then it has two ways in which you can get this information, right? To initiate defamation proceedings against someone. So one is that there has to be a complaints mechanism where, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but which it's essentially the complaint mechanism is where you can reach out to the social media platform to try and get information about who the commenter is, or there is something called a end user information disclosure order from a court, right? Essentially a court order saying that the platform needs to provide this information to you, right? Now, the way this happens is that let's go to the complaint scheme, right? And it says that, okay, so let's say you're a complainant, someone has commented something, and you've taken offense, right? As something I was talking about during the Waller case. So now, once that happens, right, a complainant can essentially make a defamation complaint to the provider, right? Which in this case would be your social media platforms. And the idea is that now within 72 hours of that defamation complaint being filed, right, the provider has to do a couple of things, right? One is between the provider and the commenter, it has to inform the commenter that so and so comment is subject to defamation complaint, and then they can remove it with the consent of the commenter, right? And then it has to go back to the complainant and tell them that, okay, the commenter has been identified. He also needs to disclose the country location of the commenter, and this is relevant because the bill is applicable only when the comment was made from within Australia, right? So if the commenter happens to be in some other country, then a lot of this is irrelevant. It's applicable when the commenter is from Australia, in the sense that the comment was made while either they were in Australia or the person themselves generally belongs to Australia. And they also have to notify the complainant on the outcome, right? Which is I'm assuming it is whether the commenter consented to having the uh, content or that particular comment removed. At this stage, if let's say the complainant is unhappy for whatever reason, and it's not really clarified what what the dissatisfaction means in this context, but essentially if they are dissatisfied, they can then ask the provider to disclose contact details of the commenter, which can be things like the name or an email address or a phone number, right? It doesn't specifically say all of them, it says any of them. And then within 72 hours, they have to and they also have to reach out to the commenter and get their consent, right? Whether the commenter is okay disclosing their contact information to the complainant. Realistically, I can't imagine where someone would agree to this, right, or provide consent for something like this. The only the thing to notice where this is not required, if there is a court order, right, the disclosure order, right. And the idea is that if the platform does all this, then it's not going to be subject to civil liability in the case. Otherwise, they are potentially a party to the defamation case.
Sapni, did you want to add something on this?
Yeah, I think that Pratik has identified pretty much a good load of bad things that could come out of this, right? But I did want to add how, the actionability of defamation, that sort of has dwindled down to something vaguer here with this particular piece of legislation. That it's usually defamation is actionable only if it's available to an audience. So just like how the court has identified that there are mechanisms to make it unavailable to an audience, at that particular point, this legislation does contradict all sorts of rational thought about, when what happens when it's restricted to minimal number of people, and how does it plan to deal with that, given the mandate of having publication as an important element to defamation. And another thing is how the applicant can go through the complaints mechanism, which Pratik very clearly elaborated on the DC or the court for the end user information disclosure order, or both. So it's a dual setup. The setup, the explanatory notes, they suggest that it's very flexible and all of that, how it can be informal for the particular case if the particular applicant finds it unnecessary to go through the strenuous process of the law, can directly get it done through the social media platform itself. But one thing, coming from India, I would obviously point out that this would not be practical in a situation like ours. And the second thing is that it adds on to the possible amount of torture you can give to somebody. And it really does add on to that. And there are a bunch of, there is a very good point to take out of this, which for me is the gem out of this not very properly worded and positioned law, is how even here there is an element of consent, and the drafters have really taken a little bit of extra effort to see to it that no absolute pre-incident consent can be inserted into terms of services, and that it can't be forced down the throat of the users. Of course, it does not ban sharing details without consent, but I think that is a good step, and these nuances should be noted even when we are making good laws, which are not as sound and shaky as this.
Hey, I have to add one thing though. I believe I stand corrected on a point I earlier made about contact information. I think I implied there was an or condition. It seems like there's an and. Right? So I just want to clarify that.
That was a fascinating elaboration. Thanks, guys. I enjoyed every second of it. Let's go to a commercial break, and then we'll come back and talk about implications for India, checks and balances, and so on.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Raw and Organic, Kunal is joined by his close friend, national football player and fitness trainer Jyoti Ann Bure. They catch up on their training sessions, the life of an athlete, and a whole lot more. On Cyrus is in conversation with Ashish Singhal, founder and CEO of CoinSwitch, to discuss CoinSwitch Kuber's journey, investing, and the cryptocurrency bill of 2021. On the Life Manifesto, Zarina decodes the Great Resignation. Let's find out why more people across the world are willing to quit their jobs. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folks discuss the potential effects of climate change on food. And on Say No to Drama, Chetna drops some truth bombs on happiness. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, do remember that many of our shows are available on YouTube. You can check that out by going to our website, ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where we have a list of all of our various YouTube channels. Finally, we'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, HDFC Mutual Fund, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Hi, we're back. We're talking to Pratik and Sapni about a new anti-trolling bill in Australia. And the bill itself is fascinating, and you guys have done a great job laying it all out, especially the complaint process. But can we sort of now talk about the checks and balances that are present in the bill? So, Pratik, I want to begin with you. Do you want to lay those out for us?
Yeah, so I think Sapni already covered some of them, right? When you spoke about the consent aspect of it, I think that's certainly important. The other one that I felt was important reading through the bill was the fact that a social media platform does have the discretion to not comply if they feel that the mechanism is being abused in some way, right? And I think it's important to have that balance in there because or social media being an adversarial space in general, the moment there is some provision like this, and just to point out, this is still very much a draft bill. None of this has gone into action just yet, but it is an adversarial space. We're seeing that. I think Twitter recently announced an update to their private information policy in terms of what you can and cannot reveal, and that's already being used to take down, to flag accounts and content about right-wing extremism in the US. A lot of open source researchers' accounts are being flagged and temporarily restricted. Right. So the moment you put out a mechanism, it's going to get abused. So the fact that they seem to have thought about that, it is interesting. It's not really clear on whether there are any grounds of how the platform determines that. So it seems like that's left up to the platform discretion at this stage. And we'll have to see how that ultimately pans out. But I think that one was interesting to me.
Right. That's pretty good. So I want to actually link this to India, but before we do that, can we talk about the implications that this development has for anonymity and what you guys thought of how this might proceed?
So before we get to that, I just have one more quick point to add about the bill itself, right? In the sense that it also has a way for the Attorney General of Australia to get involved, and it lays down two conditions, right? One is it basically seems to say that it's a defamation case which involves the social media service provider as a party, right? Now again, I'm not an expert here, but my interpretation of that is that if the social media service provider is a party, it means that they have not complied, with the whole complaint mechanism process, right? So it seems like in that case, the Attorney General can get involved. Again, this is my interpretation, so I'm happy to be corrected on this. That's something you might know better. And the other aspect is if I think there is about general other issues such as I think what they call a technical dispute over the end user information disclosure order, right? So if there are some legal technicalities that need to be worked out, the Attorney General can get involved. But it generally seems like a broad thing, right? So it appears that if there is a if there is a court case going on and for whatever reason the social media platform is a party to the case as prescribed by the bill, right? In certain circumstances, then it seems like the government can or the Attorney General can get involved, and it looks like it seemed like a public interest kind of argument, right? That this is in public interest, so we will get involved. So that's also going to be interesting to see how that bit plays out.
Right. So can we now talk about the anonymity bit of this?
Yeah, sure. And that I think that is the anonymity conversation is something we've continued to have over a couple of months now because traceability, the arguments for and against traceability have been going up and down here and there across the. So in this particular piece of legislation, in the draft where Pratik has elucidated about the end user, the possibility of having the end user's anonymity excused off, that might have a lot of repercussions across the board, and particularly given the fact that this acts onto the society, right? And we know that there are intrinsic, entrenched power dynamics and the differences that those power dynamics creates, and how this could then be a tool for people to harass. This could then be a tool for people to ensure that certain kinds of speech, certain kinds of criticisms do not surface up, and which that environment is something social media platforms have really enabled a lot of criticism and a lot of conversations, which is it is a benefit, which many a time, of course, is a harm as well, but that is also a benefit that we cannot neglect. And there we will see that this will sort of create a chilling effect, and it can also, because it's taken up in one country, it's very easy for this to go around the world, right? And I think Pratik can definitely add more on to.
Yeah, so there's a broader point about anonymity itself here, right? There's this misconception that anonymity equals, incivility or hate speech, right? Or generally aggressive behavior on social media platforms. And that misconception seems to have, it seems to have continued. And there's a lot of background there. Not possible to maybe cover all the argument. But what we'll do, I'll link to this in the show notes, right? But Gillian York has actually maintained a page where she linked to a bunch of articles and bunch of papers that addressed this whole idea that anonymity is equal to aggressive behavior or harmful behavior, right? And just recently, I think Twitter had done this study. This was right after the Euro 2020 final, right? Football, right? Which England lost, and after which three players were subjected to a lot of racist abuse. And their analysis found that most of this abuse came from accounts that seem to have been identifiable, right? Now, I'll put that in quotes because seem to have been identifiable in the sense that they looked at whether the accounts they could have been, they seem like they were names and not just pseudonyms, right? And there's also another study which Emily Vandernagel references in the recent article, where she talks about study from Germany, right, which showed that social norms played a bigger role in aggressive language, but anonymity did not seem to have a direct effect. Right? And I think that's interesting because if you look around, right, if you look around, just social media in India in general, you notice that a lot of the bigoted, misogynistic content is not coming from just anonymous accounts, right? There are several people who seem to be very happy to put their names in front of it. Facebook has, for whatever it's worth, a real name policy. Right now, again, enforcement of that is a different thing. But it for what it's worth, it has the real name policy, and it's not like there is less hate on Facebook, right? So this argument that anonymity equals hate, or that if we do away with anonymity, we will magically do away with hate speech online, it doesn't bear out. And I think it's again, it's one of those misdiagnoses of the problem that we seem to do very often. But Tapni made a very interesting point about the fact that these kind of regulation can transfer around the world. Right? It's isomorphic mimicry. I like to call it regulatory contagion, given that we're in a pandemic, right? But and again, just a recent example of this was that in this session in the winter session of the Parliament, there was a question posed to the Ministry of Electronics, Information and Technology whether India is considering a similar law to the draft to the media bargaining code that Australia enacted, right? And at the same time, around the world now, I think you have a bunch of countries that have this online safety type of regulation, right? So I think Reset did this very interesting cross comparison, which was part of their testimony to, I think, the UK Parliament as part of the online safety bill, which included so they compared how the various provisions. I think it was in Ireland, Australia, Canada, Germany, EU, and obviously with the UK. Again, notably there, I think it seems like most of them do not reference anonymity or do not go after anonymity. Again, it's one of those things, right, where you have to have one country enacting something first, and then it's dominoes falling after that.
Right. Thanks for that. I do just want to spend a second to sort of highlight that England case that you mentioned where Twitter was looking at. So the three men were Marcus Bukayo and Jadon, who didn't do well, and in the penalties, and football, as the English say, did not come home. But what is coming home is this conversation, which is I think it's time to talk about India. And should we link this to Subodh Gupta, because that's a pretty interesting case. And so, Sapni, if you could elaborate on that a little bit and sort of link that.
Subodh Gupta, many listeners would know, is a very famous artist. So during the Me Too movement, when it was in its peak in India, during some time in 2019, there was this Instagram handle, I believe, called Heard, Seen, and, which was an anonymous handle. And that handle had published a bunch of possible allegations of sexual harassment, which was committed by Subodh Gupta over the years. A lot of women had then continued to reach out to them, and there was a flurry of allegations against Subodh Gupta, the way he conducted himself. And he was acquitted of in the court. And in that same year, in 2019, the Delhi High Court, he filed a defamation suit, I think somewhere around 5 crores to de-anonymize. The suit essentially wanted to de-anonymize the person or persons behind the handle, plus, of course, get the damages of this amount. But what happened in that case, the Delhi High Court came to a middle ground where a lot of de-indexing of articles which were based on these allegations. A lot of articles were mandated to be de-indexed from search engines, and it also forced Hertzine and to remove these allegations from their pages. And instead, the court allowed Hertzine and to continue to remain an anonymous handle. And this really sparked this conversation of, right to be forgotten versus right to anonymity. And that was, and obviously it was during that time that we were again having the 2019 data protection bill conversations with that was also happening at that point. And this essentially comes back to the context that I was earlier talking about of how power structures. So somebody as influential as Subodh Gupta, whose claims were that now art galleries were not taking his creations, against a number of women or people who identify as allegedly having been harassed by him. The power structure and the power imbalance, the dynamic there is fast. And it can propagate, such legislative attempts can continue to propagate and entrench these sort of happenings. And there might not be a lot of, if there is a mandatory anonymity provision, if there was something like this in India back then, it would have been really disastrous, because some of these allegations go back to a lot of years, to decades back. And that might have real world consequences to a lot of people whose lives would have been completely turned upside down. And again, even after all these issues and even after all these allegations, Subodh Gupta's art continues to sell, and the amount of changes there have not been as deeply troublesome for him personally as it might have been to certain people whose lives would have been completely thrashed off. Yeah. So those are the sort of implications, that real world implications that such instances can have. And if India is going to take this route ahead, to me, it doesn't look like anything positive.
Yeah, and that some of the criticism in Australia seems to have been around this aspect as well, right? Like, given its heavy focus on defamation, right? Yeah, the argument is that, look, who's most likely to file a defamation suit, right? It's likely to be a politician or likely to be someone in a position of power. Your average citizen is not out there filing defamation cases against other people, right? So I think this criticism has been there in Australia as well.
Right. That's a pretty concerning development as happening about forward, and quite interesting to see how this is going to develop. So, guys, do you have any final thoughts on this at all?
I think there's one good point that probably India can take off this, that they have public consultations which are lasting over 45 days, which frankly is something, even if India is trying to adopt the most ridiculous and probably, with grave consequences, legislations with grave consequences, the sort of time that we get for public consultations can really have an impact of at least identifying and putting things out. So nothing except for that, I don't think India should be taking a lot of things out from this proposal, but that is a good thing, a good practice that India can, that would be a good isomorphic mimicry.
So I just have one quick thing, right? So I was actually in a weirdly optimistic mood when I was reading this bill, and I think what sort of struck me throughout was that, look, this bill could have been so much worse, right? And I think small mercies that there are some checks and balances in there. It's applicable only in mostly in defamation cases, which not everyone is likely to use. So it's not like it's a blanket bill that says no anonymity is allowed. So I in a weird way, I'll take that as a small positive.
Well, on that note, and very exceptional silver lining, let's call this one to a close. Thanks, Prateek. Thanks, Sapni, for joining us. And until next time, guys, bye-bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम, अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं, हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार।
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood,
Get accustomed to womanhood.
enjoy the experience of sisterhood,
Might get to wifehood
or not, choose motherhood,
or not. You'll learn to define your personhood.
earn a livelihood,
Change the neighborhood.
and get rid of the falsehood that life post-academia is easy.
So join me, Natasha,
And me, Ayushi,
on a journey from station starting point.
to station, what now?
Next station, Pudin station, and hopefully, Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.